right, everybody. It's the Jerry Metcalf podcast where top real estate agents tell how they do it. And today on the show, we have kind of a super special guest, Erik Qualman. He is one of the most renowned authors on the globe. He has visited, I think you've been seen in 55 countries or maybe more by now. You've reached out and been in the audience of, your audience has now reached 50 million people. And the list goes on, but one of your most recent book, I'm going to give everybody two of your books, Erik. One is What Happens in Vegas Stays on YouTube. That was the third one. And the most recent one is The Focus Project. Erik, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's good to have you here.
Oh, what an honor to be here.
Awesome. Well, as you know, this show is normally a show with top real estate agents in the country and the globe. But today we've got you because you've got a lot to share with us about success and obviously focus. When you think about, just so everybody can get to know you though, give us a little bit about you. I mean, you've been in 55 countries across the world, 55 countries, and you're a renowned speaker and a famous author. What's the story and how did you end up here?
Yeah, I'll try to give the shortest version, but I grew up in Detroit and then I fell into the digital space backwards when digital wasn't a thing. And so I was an intern at Cadillac. And then over my course of my career for 20 years, I was in digital. And then I saw this new thing called MySpace. And I said, this is the next big wave. This is social media is going to be huge. And at the time, everyone thought it was just going to be teenage stuff. So it was a learning for me that when you get that pushback as a pioneer, that it can be frustrating, but then you realize, wait, they don't get it. They don't understand this is coming. It's not a teenage thing. This is massive for business. This is massive for politics. And so I wrote Socialnomics, and it was the right place, right time in 2009. And then that took off. And then I did a video that went massively viral. I just produced an animated video about why social media was for businesses and why it was for real estate and why it was for governments. And so then the publisher had me speak at a conference. And then an agent in the audience said, I don't know what you do, which at the time I was the head of marketing at TravelZoo, but I don't know what you do, but you should do this for a living. And I had no idea it's something you could do for a living, which is write books and work with companies. And then I've been blessed just to be invited to now 56 countries to share my message on the books that I write, which are primarily around what's the future, how to future-proof yourself, basically from innovation to transformation, or what I like to say, it's Jetsons, Flintstones, because in your business, when you think about it, it's part Jetsons, and now it's becoming more and more Flintstones. So you can never replace that face-to-face, but when time, distance, and safety are an issue, how do I layer in digital pieces? And so that's really it at the high level. I've written 6 books and been lucky to travel the world.
Well, so you've written 6 books. Whoa.
6, yes. Yep.
So you said a lot of interesting things. They're like pioneering, future-proofing. Those are some things I think are always on the front of agents' minds. This is a business where 95%, I think the statistic is businesses fail, 20% of businesses fail in their first year. I thought it was 50%, but I've researched recently it's 20. For real estate agents, it's 95%.
I can believe it. I mean, it's a tough business, but it's a wonderful business because it's a human-based business. And yeah, I think the main key to future-proof yourself is really to kind of go to first principles, meaning when all things are crazy and everything's pulling at you, and I know I've got a bunch of friends that are in real estate, and you got 1,000 things you can do. You've got 1,000 clients that are pulling at you. It's really pausing and going, what's the one thing that if I do it well, makes everything else either easier or unnecessary? So before you get very complex, it's really always going back to that first principle. For example, just an analogy, it's not real estate based, but I was with Levi's. So Levi's obviously to produce jeans. I had a pair of jeans that I really liked, and all I wanted to do was simply reorder the jeans. And so in the past, you'd have to go to the store, but obviously we live in a digital era, so most people order online. So all I want to do is reorder a pair of these jeans. That's it. And so I look in the jeans and there's a ton of information in there. There's why Levi was invented during the gold rush, and it had a nice little graphic in there. And then it had all these numbers, and I couldn't figure out, are these 501s or these 511s? And so working with the board or working with the company at Levi's, I go, look, I called your help center. They didn't know. I read them every number. They didn't know what the jeans were. I took the jeans into the store and they didn't know what they were, because I'm very tall. I can't really order in the store, so I need to know what particular gene it is. I go, this is a very simple fix. Instead of having all this information that's not very helpful for the customer, why don't you have a QR code that I just can scan to reorder? So they had forgotten really that first principle. They'd done all this other complicated stuff within those, but they forgot the first principle of, if I love the jeans, how do I reorder them?
Well, you said something. So I don't know who knows, but I've heard you speak, and it was amazing, by the way. And in that speech, something that was so like obvious, but it's look, things can get really crazy. And being an expert isn't about adding and adding and adding. It's about what you remove, how you
Yeah,
clean things up.
exactly. A lot of people think in this new era that, let's say, innovation, that they think it's additive. That some of you sitting out there, I'm sure you work with your organization and they've added some complex system, and you're like, innovation's additive. It's just another thing on my plate. But actually, if you do it very, very well, it's always subtractive, and you're removing that subtraction for that customer, right? You're removing the friction for that customer. That's what you're subtracting. You're removing friction. And so that's why you always got to think, how can I remove friction? And whether that's old school Jetsons, remove that friction, or whether that's new school using digital tools to remove that friction, it's all about removing that friction. So for example, I was just this week, a lot of us go to the doctors, right? And so what do you have to do? You have to fill out all these paper forms, which is a nightmare. And they're asking the same question. So you fill out the form, and then there's probably 3 of them, and then you submit them. And then unbeknownst to you, they're now going to be entered manually, data entry into a database. So that's really cumbersome for both the person that works at the doctor's office and also, most importantly, for you, the patient. And then I walk in another doctor's office, and it's just on a tablet. It's just right there on an iPad. Just the radio buttons, click, 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 click. Now there's no data entry on the back end. And it's also much easier than me handwriting all this stuff out. And it also had a lot of stuff already pre-populated in those fields. So that's what I mean about really simplification, and that removing that friction for the end user or for that customer in this case.
It makes me think of something and leads me to a question for you too. But it's like, as real estate agents, sometimes I found, most of our listeners know I was an agent for 18 and a half years before I focused on the podcast and coaching. But as agents, sometimes there's a big check at the end of that, but that doesn't mean complicating it makes us more important. It's simplifying it that does. And bringing that really in, I think about, you've shared a story before about your experience with Yahoo.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I was at Yahoo. Fortunately, I was there in the 90s. It was a big .com era. I went through the .com bust. Fortunately, Yahoo was pretty strong, so we made it through like eBay and some other companies during that time. But yeah, it's crazy if you think about Yahoo. A lot of you don't know this. I think this is the story you might be alluding to. But if I was sitting there, and we actually were backpowered by a company called Google. So we're backpowered by a company called Google. They helped us with our search engine, because Yahoo was the biggest search engine at the time. And we'd sit in meetings, and we'd get these brand readouts. Like, this is what you've become a top 10 brand, Yahoo, and this is what they think you are. They think you're a search engine. And at the time, we're like, no, we're way more than a search engine. We're like a portal. And we had these things called widgets, which now you'd see on your phone are called apps. We've got all these different kind of quote unquote apps. This portal, it's your one-stop shop. You just come in here. We're more than a search engine. But then look down the road, Google, just down the road in Mountain View, we're in Sunnyvale. They're sitting there, Sergey and Larry, the founders of Google, are going, let's just focus on search. Let's just focus on search. And then Yahoo, actually, we had an opportunity to buy Google for $1 million, and it was passed on. And then the rest is history, right? They focused on search and the paid component, not to bore you guys, but there's a paid component that we came up with first. We bought a company that allowed for paid clicks. And then Google saw that was the future. While we were focused on hundreds of things, we had hundreds of different business units, Google said, nope, let's just focus on search. And so that applies to you in real estate as well. Just remind yourself, what's the one thing, if I do it well, makes everything else either easier or necessary? So Google said, if we crush this thing called search, then we're good. We could expand in other areas, but let's start with crushing that first and then expand from there.
That's amazing too, isn't it? It's like, it reminds me, it makes me think of things like Apple and how they crushed, and the things like the simplification. Even when you go to google.com, it's like, that's all there is. It's wild. It's like, whoa. So when you think about, focus, how do you know what to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good exercise. So all you listeners out there, what I would do is write down what's the 5 things this week and maybe 2 weeks. Last 2 weeks, write down what are the 5 things that consumed your most time. And you could break it out. You could do it a personal one as well. But let's just focus right now on the business side of things. What are the 5 things that are consuming all of your time? And so that list could include stuff like calling prospects. It could be calling people that are looking at homes that are current clients. It might be listings. It might be I've got to enter this stuff in a database that I have, just what happened on that call or what's the latest and greatest. So obviously it could be many things, but write down the 5 things that are consuming most of your time. And then just circle the one that if you do it well, makes everything else either easier or unnecessary, both on that 5 list, but also your list is really like 50. You got hundreds of things to do.
Like 250.
Yeah, 200, 300.
Or maybe, right? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. And so circle the one thing that makes everything else either easier or unnecessary. Now, some of you may have heard this, so this might be different. I go, just focus a minute a day more on that. So a lot of us, we'll go, let's just focus. If you can, do it an hour, 2 hours more on that. But there's probably a reason why you haven't been focused on that.
Yeah.
Because these things are pulling at you. But just start with progress versus perfection. Especially if you think about like a New Year's resolution, think progress versus perfection. Just, am I 1% better this week? And it's not, I didn't say day, because there's gonna be days you slip. But am I getting 1% better this week? And so take those 5 things, circle the one thing that makes everything else either easier or unnecessary, and then try to spend a minute per day more on that. And then gradually 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. But it's really about starting those habits at a small level. And there's actually research that shows, for example, if you don't floss your teeth, just start with flossing one tooth. And it sounds ridiculous. Who's going to floss one tooth? And that's the point.
Right, exactly.
Because once you start, you're going to floss all your teeth.
Yeah.
So it's really about getting started. But it's about being intentional. So that's how you're going to figure out how to focus, is you probably know what's driving the business. And so circle that one thing that's going to make everything else either easier or unnecessary, and just dedicate more time to it. Now, if you don't know what's driving your business, we can talk more about that. That's a little more complicated. But I think most of you that are listening do know what's the biggest driver.
Well, would you give us a minute on that though? Like, I have a feeling that's going to get interesting. We like complicated.
Yeah. So I think, well, first of all, let's make it simple at first. So just from a personal perspective, write down each day, do it in a Google Sheet. So free Google Sheet, just make a Google Sheet with the date, and then was the day at the end of the day, write down +1, +2, +3, or was it a -1, -2, -3 day? So I didn't say 0 because the day is never neutral. You're either growing or you're shrinking. So was it a +1, +2, +3 was a good day? Or was it a -1, -2, -3 was a bad day? And then next to that, in the next column, just write down why you think it was a +2 day. And then you're going to see over time a pattern. There's going to be a pattern that starts to emerge. Oh, wow, all these +2, +3, or all these positive days, there's this similarity that they share. And then conversely, when it's a negative day, I'm starting to see a pattern of what causes that to be negative. So that allows you to be more intentional with your day. And I'm a data person, so at the bottom of that sheet, just put an average so you can start to see, is my average getting better? If I started off at like 1.1, is by the next 3 months, all of a sudden it's 1.2, like you're having more positive days. And so really that's a really good exercise to do. And what I just said takes 60 seconds. And I wrote a book, The Focus Project. There's days I don't do that. 60 seconds. How could I not do that? It's just life. Life happens. So give yourself some grace. You're going to slip some days and you somehow don't fill that out. And then another thing that I found that's helpful, and there's a lot of neuroscience behind this as well, is actually in the beginning of the day, write like +3 and why it's going to be a +3. So you're intentional from the moment you get up to get to that +3 or that +2 or that +1. Write down that number and why it's going to be that way. And then, so that's also helpful. That's something I found to be really helpful. But again, give yourself some grace. There's going to be days that slip and you don't have the 60 seconds to 2 minutes to do that. But it's really helpful to have that pattern recognition. Then you can do the same thing at a deeper level if you want to sales. So what's driving a prospect? Did I get a prospect? Why is that? From a day perspective, was it a good day? From a sales perspective, was it a bad day? And why was that? What was causing that? And so again, it's really about that intentionality and making sure that each day you're focused on the things you should be focused on.
I love that. I had to grab a pen because it was like, oh, I gotta ask him this, because it really there were two things that you were boiling down to that are really interesting, and one is it's the little things. It's the 1 minute. The smallest things, when you know what they are, make the biggest impact. Like being a data person, if you can drive it down to the smallest thing that makes the biggest impact, it's not that we've got to go do all this crazy stuff. It's honing in on the focus of what needs to shift and having the power and the discipline to maintain it. Now, the other thing that's interesting is a lot of people get focused on motivation. Like, you got to do this, which is kind of fun. But this conversation has been about focus. What is there a story, or what drove you for this passion for helping people understand, implement, and drive that focus?
Yeah, it's a great question. It all started with, so my first book, Socialnomics, is written, and that book's basically how social media is going to change the way we live and do business. So right place, right time. But that book's saying, get into these digital tools, get into social. It's going to help drive your business, because absolutely it does. But at the same time, what I saw was, whoa, 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 these people are going they're just living in their phones. That's all they're doing. So it's like, what's the anti-venom to that? It's like they're focused on the wrong things. They're focused on these busy things, these busy digital things that Facebook's gamified or Instagram's gamified, so you get these dopamine hits, or even email going back. It causes these dopamine hits. So all of a sudden, all you're doing is busy, busy, busy. And you think you're progressing. You think your action's causing progress, but it's not. And so that was the impetus for the book, The Focus Project. And to be honest, I was wrestling with the same thing. A lot of you out there, you're entrepreneurs at what you do, and you kind of own your own sort of business in some aspect. And so you control, for a lot of us out there, we control our day. And
Yeah.
I would have my hair on fire each day going, wait, how is this even possible? Aren't like, I own the company. Like, what's happening?
Well, and then where is this really going? Except I'm just getting worn out. Another interesting story that you share that I want to pull out of you, because it's fun. You talk about, I don't remember where you were speaking, but there was an event after, and you were in a room full of people that, like, we know from the names on our candy bars and those families. And you in the room, and you start asking questions, and it's fascinating the common denominator of those questions. But I'd love, without giving away too much more, for everybody to hear your version of it.
Yeah, no, I was really honored. I was at a conference that had, as you mentioned, if you have Halloween candy, and you'll recognize every name in there, Mars, Hershey. And some of these people have the last name Mars, and some live on the street or live in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And so I was talking to all these folks that do that. And most of them are family-owned businesses today. Some are corporate-owned now, but most of them originally started as family-run businesses. And so I'm talking to the patriarchs of these businesses and asking them, what's the key to your success? Because that's what I want to know. Good answers are great, but better questions, you're going to learn more from questions. So what's the key to your success? And they say focus. And I go, when you aren't as successful, like your year's not as successful, what's the issue? And they go, lack of focus. And I go, and then everyone kept saying it, focus, lack of focus. So same answer to the question. And then I started talking to other people, whether it's school teachers, whether it's folks in real estate, and they started saying the same thing. It's really about, my success is all driven by focused on the big things versus the busy. And so that also helped kick off the book. That's why I wrote that story at the front of the book, because it's just like we're all wrestling with it. And it's been thousands of years. The difference is now in a hyper-connected world, it's on digital steroids. And so it's even harder to focus. And so that's why I wanted to test out. That's why it's called a project. I wanted to take a year to do this, and focus is so hard that it took 2 years because I had a lot of failed starts. And so I go, let's just break it into months where I focus on something each month, because I got excited. You're going to get excited listening to this. If you go, man, for example, what if I focused on just cleaning my house or organizing everything I know on my to-do list on the house? If I just was able to spend the entire month doing that, how great would that be? How awesome would the house be if I did that? And then you kind of walk that back, go, well, that's not really realistic. So let's break it down and maybe let's dedicate just a half hour more to organize the house. But for most of us out there, you're probably going to start like I did. That first month was sales. So how could I increase the sales for the company? We do a lot of things. We have an animation studio, we have books, but primarily it's like, how do I get more performances booked on stage? Because that helps drive everything. So how do I get more performances booked on stage? And I really was more passive. People would just reach out to us and say, we want him, rather than being proactive with the team. And again, it was 5 false starts because I go, okay, we're going to dedicate a half hour day to go after the sales. I'm going to dedicate my time a half hour day. And I got 18 minutes the first month. The month, supposed to be a half hour day, 18 minutes. That's how hard focus is. And so after 5 false starts, that's why it took 2 years, all of a sudden we're able to do it. And then fortunately, otherwise there's no book, when we did that, all of a sudden record amount of sales, not only for that month, but also for the year, because we did it in January and it kicked everything. We got so many sales and so many leads that month just by that little tweak. And what I just said is super simple, but it's not easy because
Well, and what I'm
all the time.
Yeah, and it was really there's a few things. It was focusing by just like allocating your time to productive activity. And then how'd you know what was going to be productive?
I didn't. That's what we thought, that if it didn't work, there's no book, there's no project. And so I was looking at research from thousands of years and being like I took the institutional research, stuff that exists, because it goes back to BC, to people struggling with focus. And so whether you look at the Stoics like Marcus Aurelius, they've got all this stuff written down. And then also I took the street science, me testing out in a modern world. So some of the stuff works, some of it didn't. So that's what I shared with the audience. And I always say, do you. And so hopefully you take out of the book like one thing that's going to help you, maybe a couple things that's going to help you 5 seconds from now as well, 5 years down the road. But that's we didn't know what was going to work. So the key was, let's just focus. The one thing that we wanted to do though on the sales side is what I mentioned earlier, is for us, it's really connecting with past clients. Because even if they don't rebook you or buy another house, they're connected with someone that is probably in that market.
Mm-hmm.
And so what can happen to us, which would happen to me, is like, I'm so busy. I'm like, why do I have all these lunches? Let's cancel these lunches. Then all of a sudden, 6 months down the road, I'm like, what happened to sales? It's because I wasn't taking the time to do the things that drive that long-term success. And so when stress starts to happen, we start to focus inward. We start just kind of focus on tactical things rather than focusing outward. And it's very important, your relationship-based business, it's really, it's time consuming to have that face-to-face and to have those conversations. But long-term, that's going to put you in a place for success.
Yeah, we're the actions that drive success, right? All right. One more question, then we're going to do our final 3 questions. You've talked a lot about questions and, listening. And in business, I think in the world, I always say Google real estate agent and you'll see real quickly what the world thinks of us, and it's not real great. But that thing about focus in this next topic, give us a real competitive edge as agents, because not many do it. It's listening and questions, and the power of that. When you're in a negotiation, you're winning business, you're meeting a new person, what you ask them says so much more than what you might think you know. But give us a little bit about what that is for you, because I know you've got a lot of great. I actually just got off of a coaching call before this call and applied it, and it was like, so I'm going to let you take it from there.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I love it. It's been a learned process for myself, because if you think about, if I got on a sales call or a Zoom call or talking to someone, they're like, tell us why you should be the person for this conference, why you should speak at this conference. And all of a sudden I explode on why I should speak at the conference. And I hadn't asked any question. And then I quickly learned, no, it's much better to ask just a series of questions. The less I talk, the better it'll be. And so not only am I learning, but people love talking about their business. And so it's really, and then you're listening for those keywords. Okay, this is what they want. Okay, that's a keyword. I got to mirror that. Mirror meaning use the same language and style, and even your body. And a lot of you know this because you're in real estate. You know how important that is to mirror your different clients, because they're all different. Not only how you stand, or maybe sit, or actually your voice, the tone of voice. What words do they use? Do they say you guys? Do they say y'all? I mean, be yourself, but it's really about understanding how to take in that information, really understand who that person is. And so a great question to ask. So everyone out there, I guarantee you've asked this question probably hundreds of times yesterday, but at least you've asked this 20 times yesterday. You ask someone, how are you doing? Which is a good question, but it's not a great question. So a great question is, and this could make you uncomfortable at first, and that's how you grow. So you might want to test this out on your Uber driver, or maybe it's at your server at the restaurant first before you do this. But it's really, how are you doing on a scale of 1 to 10? How are you doing on a scale of 1 to 10? Or in real estate, think about adjusting that question to where, how'd you like this house on a scale of 1 to 10? And they come back and say a number. And then you go, well, how do we get it to a 10? What would make it a 10? So now you're getting not only quantitative feedback, but qualitative feedback. So you're not just, this client's not kind of going every which way but loose, that you're starting to help them out with good questions, with great questions. And so that's an example how you do it. Now, what they're going to do, like, so the house example, I guarantee what's going to happen. Most of the time they're going to say 7 because it's a safe number. Or even if you ask someone how their day's going, they're
Probably going to be like
7.
a 3, actually.
And then and then in time, say you can't say 7, because now they've removed the safety.
Because they always say 7. Yeah.
Yes.
Or no,
So
my favorite.
60, that's terrible. And then 80 is pretty good.
Well, my favorite that you do is that you'll say, what's going to make it an 11?
Yeah.
Right? Like forget 10, like on a scale of 1 to 10. Well, what would make it an 11? And just see what you get. And some of the other fun questions, or I love another one you talk about, well, what do you not want? Right? Like when you're looking, what do you want to make sure doesn't happen? Like that's a good, it's funny because people will so quickly, in a more formal setting, they may not go into that. So if you get into that, a lot of people can more easily tell you what they don't want than what they do want. But it's interesting how that can give you a starter to get to the truth and what they really do want. I love those questions.
No, for sure. No, for sure. I mean, that story, one of those stories came from the jewelry business, because the fiance comes into the store and is trying to buy a ring for his soon to be fiance. And they're trying to ask, well, what do you want? And he didn't really know. And so the better question to ask that person was, what do you know she doesn't want? It's like, oh, I know she doesn't want gold. She doesn't like gold. Okay, there we go. The band's not going to be gold. I know she doesn't like any colored on the stone. Okay, that narrows it down. So sometimes that's exactly right. Those are sometimes better questions to flip it. If you're hitting against the wall, don't just continue asking the same questions, flip it. Or like I learned in our business, and this even happened this week, so I'm going to have to adjust the question because we're doing an animation project. So a question would be, if you had to pick one, do you want this animation video to be more informative or more entertaining? And they're like, we want both. And it's like, no, if you had to pick one. And a lot of times people don't want to pick. They just don't. So then you can adjust the question to maybe add 3 things. So let's say adjust the question to be, okay, we want this video to be entertaining, educational, and empowering, because you got to entertain in order to educate. And once you're educated, you're empowered. So better now I go, all right, you got 10 gold coins, you can't break them. Allocate those coins across those buckets. Now, occasionally get someone that's got some guts and they'll put 5 coins in a bucket, which I love. I'm like, that person has some actual guts. But more times than not, it's going to be 3, 3, and 4. But at least now you know which one's the leader. Which one's the most important thing you need to nail? Even if you do all 3, which one's the most important thing that you need to nail? And you can do that in real estate. So it's like, all right, closets, walk-in closet, pool, and a big yard. If I gave you 10 gold coins to allocate across those 3, how would you allocate those coins?
I love it. Or you want to sell this house quickly, terms, or price.
I love it. Yes.
Right. Yep. I love it. All right. Final 3. This has been so much fun. Let's go with the final 3. Number 1, if there has been a greatest resource in your success, what would you say that is?
People. Like success doesn't happen alone. There's the old, I mean, they've seen it statistically that your wealth is the average of the 5 people you hang out with. 5 or 6, I can't recall, but I think it's 5. But more importantly, rather than wealth, that's a numeric, that's why they track it. But you are basically the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And so it's really understanding who are those 5 and really fostering those relationships. That's the greatest key, and having those sounding boards for people that can say, that's not up to your standard. That book's not up to your standard, or you've been better. I think you can do better. And so it's really having those trusted folks around you, whether those are relatives, whether those are friends, whether those are business colleagues. It's really understanding that success doesn't happen alone. So it's really, at the end of the day, I could talk at length about artificial intelligence, but it's really garbage in, garbage out. So if you're surrounded by folks that are putting garbage into your life, then it's going to be garbage that you produce, whether that's artificial intelligence or whether that's human beings. And so that's been the key to my success, is making sure I surround myself with the right people.
What's the most important, I'm adding a question. What's the most important thing to know about artificial intelligence right now?
Well, I think the top questions I get, is it going to take my job? And I say absolutely not. But someone that knows how to use artificial intelligence, that knows how to leverage it, will take your job. So you need to start testing this stuff out. And it's really what we talked about at the beginning. It's how do I use artificial intelligence to remove friction? So for example, if I send out emails based on some activity, and so someone saw the house and I want to sell it, can artificial intelligence help me send that out? Or maybe it doesn't send it, maybe it crafts it, and then you take a final review of it. So it still has that human touch. You're like, oh, this person likes Girl Scout cookies, I'll put that in there. Artificial intelligence might not know that. And so it's really trying to make your life have the tools, so the tools, you use the tools to help you rather than tools using you. Meaning that if you had to require to put stuff in Salesforce and it's actually causing a decrease in sales because all you're doing is data entry, that's the tool using you. So it's really, whether it's artificial intelligence or the next greatest thing, it's understanding how do I use this at a level that's going to help me have more face time and more personal time with those customers.
Artificial intelligence does work a lot like people questions, right? Like people can use you or you can work together and collaborate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also with like Chat GPT or whatever your favorite, Google Bard, whatever the tool you use, is the better you get at asking the prompts, the questions, the better your results you'll get from the artificial intelligence. So it's sort of a learned process on, you have to sort of train the tool a little bit to know who you are, but also
and learn about yourself a little bit. Isn't it interesting how you can ask a question and think it was clear, and you're like, well, this is artificial intelligence. It's not like even maybe it's me. Maybe there's it teaches you about your own assumptions a little bit.
Exactly. No, it's a really good point.
We didn't even go into artificial intelligence. We're gonna have to do that on another time. But last 2 questions. These are quick. What is of the 6 books you've written, which one do you think you would most recommend to an agent to read first?
The Focus Project, the latest one. It's the only book that I've written where it has personal stories in it. So it's uncomfortable for me to start writing that way, but it's the best place to start because everyone can use Focus. And then you can spawn from there if the other books make sense for you. But that one I know for sure everyone can use. Because, for example, if I gave myself or anyone listening 48 hours in the day, you still wouldn't get everything done. You wouldn't. You've got so much stuff that you have to do. You're just not going to get it done. And so you're fooling yourself every day thinking you're going to get everything done. So it's really about, am I going to get the big things done or am I going to get the busy ones done? And so I reread the book myself because there's a lot of research in there, because gravitational pull always has me getting unfocused. And so I've got to go back and go relearn it myself. Someone that wrote the book and researched it, that's how hard it is.
Wow. Last question. If there's any one thing, if we're going to forget everything from this conversation today, but one thing, what do you hope that we take away from this today?
Be intentional. So each and every day, how we live our days is how we live our lives. And pretty simple, but we let the week slip by just running a million miles an hour. And then we wonder how we got to a place or didn't get to a place more often than not. And so it's really, you always think we have unlimited time and that we say yes to everything, but really it's how do I say no to the small opportunities so I can say yes to the big ones. So being intentional with every moment, checking in with yourself, mindfulness. What am I doing? What should I be doing? Is it helping others? Because I just gave a commencement address at Michigan State University, and I told the students, I go, I don't cheer for your success. What I cheer for you is to serve others, because when you serve others, success is sure to follow.
So true. And like, let's just mic drop that, Erik. That was awesome. Thank you so much for your time and being here. And it's so good to see you.
No, it's so great to see you. Thanks for having me join here. It's wonderful.